Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, no matter where you're at. Thank you for clicking on this video today. My name is Matthew Bonig. So in this video, I'm going to be covering a little bit about how to do development work on the CDK Lightbox. As in the previous videos mentioned, I'm looking for some help in doing the development work. Not only do I need help in understanding what needs to be built, but I kind of need some help in getting this done. We've all got a lot on our plates, me as well, and I have a tendency to pick up too many side projects. So I'd like this to be a community project. I don't want to be the only one working on it, because if I do that, then I'm going to build it for myself and not for other people. So I want to put this video together so that you, the community, can understand and get walked through how to do the development work on it and hopefully contribute. So to get started here, I've gone ahead and cloned the repository here locally. On my local disk, I just call it the CDK Lcars. If you know my history of being a Star Trek fan, that's my code name when I was doing the initial development on it. Here, I've gone ahead and done a yarn install, and I'm working off of the main branch. So this is a good place to get started. Now, of course, to get anything going, you always want to do a yarn install. This will get all of your dependencies installed and working. Once those are all taken care of, shouldn't generally have any problems with that. Now to do the development, you can go ahead and do a yarn start. And this will go ahead and run the application locally. All right, so once it's up and running, you can see it here. It's just a Electron app, so it'll be running on your desktop, and it's effectively just a web browser, really. So anything that you can do with your React code, things like the dev tools and everything, they all apply here as well. So I can always come in here and take a look at the React components that are involved with all of this. I've got my console if I need to be doing debugging. I've got the source available that I can start looking at on here. And I've got things like this does do source maps, so if you want to debug and reference based off the original TypeScript code, you can do that all in here. So this is the app that's running, and anytime you do any changes to the source code, it'll automatically refresh here in the app. So I can kind of come back over here, say I wanted to change something, and I'll go through all the details here in a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and change, say, this widget color here for the first level widget. I'm just going to make that a green. So I go ahead and save my file, and immediately in the app you can see that's refreshed, and now that widget is green. So hopefully very quick on the development cycle. As you make changes, you'll see them just instantly reflected in that app that's up and running. Of course, unit tests are always a good way to do stuff, but at the end of the day, touch testing is probably where you're going to spend most of your time. All right, so one thing to know about the Electron apps right now is that there is both a back-end process that runs and a front-end process that runs. And the back-end process is responsible for everything that isn't directly the web or the HTML renderer. So if you have things like menu clicks, if you have things like file access that you need to do, that's actually all handled by the main process. And if we take a look at the main process, one of the key concepts of this main process is the idea that you're going to send messages on an IPC channel back and forth between the main process and the rendering process. In this case, I've set up here in the main process these handlers for when certain events happen on that IPC, the inter-process communicator, I think it's called. So if you want something to happen on the back end, like you want a file dialog box to open up, and when the UI wants that to happen, it sends a message on the IPC back to the main process, and the main process is actually responsible for doing that work. So in the case of like selecting a CDK app to open, in this case, I fire off this open workbench event. So the open workbench event gets fired off from the renderer, and the backend listens for that. And in this case, this listener is going to go and open up a show dialog box. And assuming a good directory is picked and it's a CDK directory and all of this, then it's going to open up those file contents, parse them, and then reply back to the renderer with that state, both the tree.json and any saved state about the locations of constructs that you've dragged and dropped around and things like that. Similarly, if you update that state because you've moved objects around on the workbench on the plane, and we want to save those into state so that they're just not lost when you restart the application, any of those state changes causes a Workbench state update event to fire off onto the IPC. And here in the back end on the main, we listen for those events, and then this handler right here goes and just writes that information down into disk. One of the issues that are opened up right now is that this fires off just way too frequently. Every single little state change that happens on the UI causes a write down to disk, and that's probably a little bit too aggressive. So, there's probably going to be a step in here, perhaps even back on here, where we wrap this handler in a debounce method so that it's only going to really try to write that state, say, every second rather than on every single update that happens. That's the main process. You're probably not going to be spending a whole lot of time back there. If you worked with Electron apps before, then this is all probably pretty familiar to you. But if not, I'd recommend, if this is the first time digging into it, go take a look at some good Electron docs about this main versus renderer process and get some understanding about how these things work back and forth. I could cover it more here, but there's already a lot of good documentation out there, and I don't want to reinvent the wheel there. So most of the time, you're probably going to be spending a lot of the effort over in the renderer side of this. So this is the React app, and we have a pretty standard React application here written in TSX files. Nothing too fancy going on here. Now, I'm not a real great React developer. I'm familiar with it. I've used it a few times over the years, but it's definitely not my forte. So there's probably some things here that definitely need some love and some attention to make sure that everything is nice and tidy when it comes to React applications. This app right here really handles a lot when it comes to responding to state changes, getting those things sent back to the main process so they can be committed to disk. It also handles things like the undo and the redo. So any of those menu options, hitting Control-Z or Command-Z on your keyboard to undo something, that actually comes from the main process. So these effects and everything in here are about listening for those events and handling them accordingly by telling the state management system, in this case, Zustand, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that either. Telling that to, roll back the state or roll forward the state and things like that. There's some very handy middleware. So it's a little heavy right now here in this code. I'd certainly like to make it a little bit lighter. If you've got some good skills around refactoring hooks and isolating these things off so it's all easier to read and manage, I'd love for you to take a stab at getting those things fixed up. But the real meat of everything is in this Workbench service construct. So listen to me. Component. So in this Workbench surface component here, we get handed the state. So first off, this is using a system called Canva that is a nice abstraction for creating shapes and lines and transitions and animations and things like that over the HTML5 canvas. So I did not want to sit there and be drawing SVGs and all these things directly on the canvas. So Canva is being used here. It's a really great library. In addition, I'm using this React Canva library to make the interaction with React really nice and easy. So two key things here. If you're going to be doing a lot of work, I recommend you go read the documentation on those two libraries and get familiar with how they work, because they're really cool and you're going to be digging with them a lot. But this Workbench service really starts off by creating a Canvas stage. And then a layer. There is a background layer, which gives us the dots in the background application. And then there is a layer for the actual construct. So the construct widget represents the construct itself and at any particular node, plus everything below it. So in this case, at this layer on the Workbench, we just create one of these things. We hand it the tree.json from the cdk.out directory. And then at this point, this component goes in and renders itself, renders its node, as well as all of the children node. And then that is just a recursive drawing of all those elements on the screen. It handles things like the widget background portion, a little bit of the header information. So that's the, the little colored bar that we saw at the top. That is the name, the ID, the type, the little hide and unhide icon, those things. And then a line that goes from this widget to its parent scope along the way. So that's really about it. So those are the key things, understanding the Electron process when it comes to main and the renderer, what things you have to do back in the main process. Pretty much anything with the file system is back in the main. Anything with the menus is back in the main process. And then all the React stuff is in the renderer. And I'm using Justand for the state management system. So it's a great little state management system. I really like it. I've liked it a lot better than some previous ones that I've used. Nicer than Context, nicer than Redux, those sorts of things. So I recommend you go read some of the documentation on that. All of that, I hopefully took a good step. This was my first time working with it, but hopefully the way that I'm creating this state in Justand and how I've separated these things out into sort of different areas of the state. So, the status messages that show up on the footers, the little widget at the bottom that controls whether we're looking at hidden elements or what level of elements, that's separated into these areas. And I'd love to get some input back from anyone who's worked with Justand before and let me know, is there a better way that I could have done this? But again, something that you would want to take a look into and read into. It's a great little library. I'm a big fan of it from what I've seen so far. So that's about it. Now, once you've made all of your changes and everything, how do you commit these and how do you put them back into the project as a whole? So standard pull request process, I would say in that case, I would start by always forking the repository. Get it into your own organization, work on it over there. Once you've made all of your changes and things, I don't particularly mind if you do your work in your forked main or if you do it in a branch. Doesn't really matter to me too much. But once that's done, go ahead and create a pull request within GitHub to take those changes from your fork back into the main, and we'll go ahead and review those things. I'm looking for maintainers of this project besides just me, other people that can help me review code, verify that things are kind of going in the right path and being useful, and we're maintaining code state and everything else like that. And when it's all done, we'll get those things merged in, and then periodically we will release the app out through the build process that is set up in GitHub Actions. Finally, a few other little things. ESLint is being used. There is the ESLint configuration here. I have temporarily turned off some of these things because I personally didn't find them to be very useful rules to have in place. Again, always looking for input on whether or not I'm wrong with that, or if you'd like to see those things turned back on, if there are good arguments for them that are great. One of the things that I have turned on here with ReSharper is the option to automatically run ESLint every time I save a file. Highly recommend you do that. I believe VS Code has a similar option to automatically run ESLint. Please always run ESLint before you do any commits and pushes and things like that. It really helps us keep the code clean. Unit testing. So I do have some unit tests built into the application, mostly around the Justand state. I really want to, from day one, really tackle that well when it came to state management. But unit testing around components is not there, mostly because I didn't know how to unit test them effectively when I didn't really know what I wanted the components to do. Now that the components are generally working the way that I want them to, some unit tests could probably be retrofitted in place, but I don't really have any experience doing that with React. So if someone out there would be willing to go and say, write some unit tests around something as simple as the construct widget. I know I said simple, even though this is the most complex widget in the thing. And then help me understand a good way of writing these unit tests and getting those in place, because I would like this to be an application that is as close to 100% code coverage on our tests as possible. So that's it. Hopefully that covered everything and gives you a good place to start on getting the development work on this done. If you have any questions, always please leave them in the comments. You can also reach out to us on the cdk.dev Slack server in the CDK Lightbox channel. You can also hit me up on Twitter at Matt Bonig. Otherwise, thank you. Have a great day. Oh, Of course, one last thing, the YouTube algorithm. So if you thought this video was good, if it was helpful, please give me a like. If you like what I'm doing here with the CDK Lightbox or with my CDK releases videos and you want to be notified when new ones come out, hit that subscribe button. And it does help me out. It really helps me understand if people actually like these videos, if I'm doing a good job or not. And that, I think, is it. So have a great day. Thank you as always, and we'll see you next time.